Dr. Barry, London News, Melbourne. Sometimes you get sick of answering the same questions because people are too goddamn lazy to watch a video. If you watch this video, I'll keep this brief. This explains enforcement for the common law courts. Without enforcement, you've got nothing. And it's took us 4 years to get to this point. We're now a member of the Sheriff's Federation in the United States, which gives us that a little bit extra recognition. But look at this video. There's a few people, the sheriffs on there explaining their situation, and there's a wonderful girl at the end explains the whole system, how it works. If you watch this, you won't need to ask silly questions. But it is the only way back. And after this video, if you watch it, you'll understand the system. Dr. Barry, sign off. Please support your local sheriff, because we're on the way to get rid of these rotten criminal politicians, and there's a lot of them around. Bye for now.
The group points to a 1997 case where the Supreme Court ruled the federal government couldn't force local officers to perform gun background checks. The sheriffs say they don't have to enforce any law they believe violates the Constitution.
And the Constitution is the supreme law of the land.
One of the sheriffs involved in that case was Richard Mack, then sheriff of Graham County, Arizona. He founded the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. At these conferences, sheriffs and other law enforcement are trained how to push back against what they consider federal government overreach.
That's our job. It isn't to go along with bureaucrats. It isn't to go along with government criminals. It is to uphold and defend the Constitution and defend the American people's liberty.
You'll hear some other sheriffs get up and talk.
Sheriff Randy Hargrove of Houston County in East Texas has attended the conferences and says sheriffs have the power to investigate election irregularities and to refuse to enforce mask mandates and gun laws.
They have the authority to stand against any laws that go against your Second Amendment. You know, okay, ATF, we're not going to let you come in and start taking everybody's guns. We're not going to let you we're not going to let it happen. If someone is violating your rights as a citizen, it's my duty to see that those rights are protected.
Put yourself in the way of people who are trying to victimize innocent American people.
He was like, well, let me correct you on that. It's not a department. So maybe this is common knowledge to people, but I didn't really know this, or I had never really kind of digested this before. But the sheriff's department is incorrect. It's a misnomer. It is called the Office of the Sheriff, and with real good reason. So we have a police department, we have a Department of Education, a department of this, a department of that. And department, the word literally entails a government agency that is hired directly by someone else in the government, paid by them, and they are subject or subordinate to someone in government. So in other words, at the police level, we have a PD. Here we have a city police department and a city chief of police, right? And the chief of police is actually going to be hired by either the city manager or the, I believe it was the city council. City council or even the mayor. And this group of people who hires him are therefore his direct bosses or her direct boss. So this chief of police is going to be accountable to whoever hired them and going to have specific job descriptions and duties based on that. And they can be fired by these people as well. And the department, the police department, is a department of the government. It is directly subject to and accountable to other levels of government. The office of the sheriff is the polar opposite of that, which is why it holds the name office. And so as I was researching and reading more about this, because this retired sheriff corrected me on this, I was realizing that it's just the same as the office of the president or the office of the governor or any office that's political office. We call them an office because they are directly accountable to and directly hired by the citizenry. So we directly elect sheriffs in this country, which is the only directly elected law enforcement agent in the entire country. And it is the only constitutional law enforcement agent in the entire country. In other words, this is the office of the sheriff is a direct creation of the Constitution. So a police department or the chief of police could be eliminated or created by law, but this means that it's subject to law. Its existence is literally subject to law. The existence of the office of the sheriff is not subject to law. It is a constitutionally created office. So therefore, this means that the sheriff has a vast amount of discretion in his realm of power because he is directly elected by the people. Therefore, there is no direct superior to the sheriff in his realm of power. Now, his realm of power is confined to a county. For the most part, it's counties in the United States. There are a couple places that are called parishes. There may be a few other names, but the county is where the sheriff is going to more or less be the chief law enforcement officer. You could almost call him the president of the county. And he has deputy sheriffs who will be subject directly to him and acting as his agents. They are essentially mini sheriffs, right? This is so much information, but it's amazing to have been able to learn. And so this discretion allows the sheriff to operate more freely in his realm of power, right? He is not directly subject to any direct superior other than the people. Research that I was doing, I found that there are approximately 3,083 sheriffs currently, and about 98% of them are elected by their citizens. Okay, so about 2% of sheriffs are not elected. So the majority of sheriffs in the entire United States are elected. And this is because the constitutions of these states have put their positions in the Constitution themselves. Now, different states will have different details in their constitutions about this role, this position. But in North Carolina, the role is defined by a statute, by an actual law. So the law kind of gives a broad overview of the powers of the sheriff and the sheriff's office, or the office of the sheriff. And it says the sheriff is the only officer of local government required by the Constitution. The sheriff, in addition to his criminal justice responsibilities, is the only officer who is also responsible for the courts of the state and acting as their bailiff and marshal. The sheriff administrates and executes criminal and civil justice and acts as the ex officio detention officer. So essentially, the deputy sheriff has been held by the Supreme Court of the state to hold an office and special trust and confidence, acting with the powers of the sheriff. So in North Carolina, the sheriff's powers are not very specifically defined, right? They're rather loose, probably with reason, with purpose, and they're loose so that the sheriff can act rather freely within his realm of power over his citizenry, protecting his citizenry, providing law and order. And so this is what I really want to hone in on in this little segment here. You can go read a lot of the more nitty-gritty details, but what I really want to hone in on here is that the sheriff has this very juxtapositional position. He has a very juxtapositional role. And what I mean by this is that we need sheriffs, right? We need law enforcement. Why? If you listen to anything that I talk about on a daily, bi-daily basis, you would understand that government is necessary per a lot of theories that we've gone through, from Locke and Hobbes, Montesquieu, others. It's necessary because if we don't have government, we live in a state of war. We live in this state of anarchy where there is no law and order, and therefore there is no liberty, since there is no law and order, right? When there's no law, people are free to do whatever they want, and people live in anarchy. So we need law. But the problem is, if we have law, that law needs to be confined. Those making those laws need to be confined, because the same people who needed law in the first place, being put in positions of power to make law, are just as likely to abuse that power. But now they have more power to abuse, right? And so we end up putting ourselves in a position where we could be abused worse under a state of law than we were in a state of no law. So the sheriff is essentially representing law. He is the law. People would call him the law back in the 1800s when you would go west, right? He's the law. They'd say, "Are you the law?" The sheriff has a very unique role. He is not only tasked with making sure law is followed, but he's also tasked with making sure the laws that he makes sure are followed are within the confines of the Constitution. He not only protects the citizenry from themselves, but his job is also to protect the citizenry from himself and from the government at large, and from any unjust, unconstitutional, or arbitrary laws. Citizenry. He turns out to be the greatest enemy of a tyrant and the greatest friend of liberty. Does this make sense? This blows my mind. He could very literally, the sheriff and the sheriff's deputy could very literally be the hands of tyranny. They are the closest to us. They are the ones that on a day-to-day basis are actually acting out the Constitution. Every interaction they have with a citizen is the Constitution coming into play with law and the citizen. Law and the citizen, the Constitution being that bridge, bridging that law and that citizen, protecting that citizen from that law. So whoever takes this role, this position of sheriff, has an incredibly weighty job. I don't know if I can emphasize this enough, and there's so much more I could get into that maybe I'll do a second video to unpack this even more. But the role of sheriff is critical because he both protects the citizens from themselves and he protects the citizens from himself and from the government at large. If he's asked to do something that would destroy liberty or violate his citizens' rights, he is the last line of defense. He is the last one who has the precious jewel, that decision. He holds that last decision. It comes down to him. Will he or won't he be an arm of an arbitrary government? And one that I hope all of the sheriffs and deputy sheriffs around this country consider, and those candidates that are thinking of these roles deeply consider. This is no small matter. Countries throughout history have found that the greatest abuses of liberty, the greatest abuses of power have come from those lower level magistrates who are simply arms of those in power. Hitler and his entire rule depended on the enforcement of what he did by those lower level officers. Do we have officers who simply think of themselves as arms of the law and nothing else? Or do we have officers who think of themselves as arms of the law, but representatives and defenders of the Constitution that confines that law? That's the critical question. That's the question we should all be asking anyone running for office of the sheriff. But I hope this is impacting you. I hope that you're taking in and considering just how weighty this position is. Liberty begins and ends at this position. This is the last line of defense. All right, well, until next time.
Well, I hope you found that interesting. That explains everything. There's no need to ask a single question. Everything you need to know is on London News. Everything about common law, sheriffs, it's all on there, guys. Please support us. We've got paid money for websites. It's all due again. We need printing. We need money. And that's the only thing slowing us down now. We've got to try and put a vehicle on the road. We need a place where we can permanently run an office and courts. But, you've got to help us to help you. Stop evictions, etc., etc. Bye for now. See ya.